Welcome to another edition of Speak Up Presents. Tonight we're going to talk about growth management, and very fortunately have with us Pat Frank, who's clerk of the court in Hillsborough County. Appreciate your being here, Pat. Thank you so much. And one of the founding people of growth management legislation in the state. And Ron Weaver, who represents developers and knows a bunch about growth management from that view.
Thank you.
Mariella Smith, thank you for being here too, who's been involved quite a bit in anti-development methods, right? And the planner, the big planner, Bob Hunter from Hillsborough County Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Welcome, glad you could be here. Pat, since you have the historical perspective on how we ever ended up with even the words growth management around, can you give us a little history of all that?
Well, I think it's similar to the feeling that people have right now about taxes. And when you have enough reaction from the public, the legislature then begins to pay attention to the issues. And it was about 20 years ago, and there was a groundswell from the public to say that Florida is just sprawling too much, and the growth is out of hand. Luckily, at that time, it was sort of a magical time in Tallahassee because we had the leadership of Harry Johnston in the Senate and John Harold Thompson in the House. And both of them were very receptive to the idea of doing something about addressing the issue. At first, what we did was we started with a state plan. And there were some general concepts about how we wanted Florida to look in the future. And that began to tweak the curiosity of everybody about how we were going to address the growth management issue. So the next step was to really get into it, put our teeth into it, and start thinking, how can we control growth, not stop it, but control it, so that people can live with the growth. And out of that came the Growth Management Act. It was divided in two parts. The Natural Resources Committee had the part that dealt with the coastal areas and the barrier islands. And then the committee that I chaired dealt with all of the rest of the territory, the cities and counties territories. We started out with quite a bit of controversy. Nobody wanted anything to be done. The cities didn't, the counties didn't, the developers didn't. And so there was a lot of discussion. The basic idea was that we thought that the state should not control the way that development would occur, because we didn't see it as a top-down situation. We saw it as a bottom-up. So we set frameworks by saying that you will have a plan that you must submit to the state, and that plan will incorporate certain elements in it, and you have to address those elements. And of course it would be transportation and things, infrastructure issues. It was up to the communities to decide at what level they wanted to provide those services. And we gave a very wide window for the public to express itself at the beginning of the development of a plan, and also, I might say, at the amendments of the plan. And that was the stage at which the public was to be welcomed at all corners to put its input in. And then, as you got further along, when you got to the point where you were actually implementing the plan, and you got down to the zoning level, and then particular zoning, it narrowed up the window. Then the public had less of an opportunity to influence what was happening. So actually the most important part that the public played was the input in the comprehensive plan and the amendments. There also were the regional planning councils, which at that time were very, very powerful, and where communities crossed boundaries, and we provided legislation that would have addressed that issue. For instance, if you had roads that were multi-county roads, then the Regional Planning Council would have to sign off on the adoption of the development. And inherent in the whole plan was the idea that development occurred only when the infrastructure was being constructed concurrently with the construction of the buildings. In other words, not afterward, not necessarily before.
Well,
You
they've
don't have
changed
to-
that definition somewhat over
I
time.
dare say.
Okay. Concurrent doesn't mean what concurrent used to mean.
Yeah, right. So that's just a thumbnail idea of where we.
And that legislation was passed when, Pat? Was that
86.
86. Where are we today with that kind of planning, Bob?
We're still interpreting concurrency. No. I think the legislation was very, very good for the state of Florida. It's probably cutting edge as it deals with planning legislation in the country, because while it wasn't top down, it made cities and counties look at how they were going to respond to growth, which I think was an excellent mandate. And it still left to the cities and counties their choice on what we call levels of service, whether we want congested roads or no traffic, as an example, or as it dealt with levels of service for trash or sanitary sewers, solid waste, sewer, water, all these things. And all this is mandated that each city and county look at it. But the level of service and how each local government pays for it is a local governmental decision. And that's what I think is good about the flexibility. Not that local governments have been able to keep up with what they've been approving, but the intent is there.
Did the original plan take into consideration schools? The
No.
building a school, that's a later
No,
Last year.
well,
afterthought,
I
just
can
last
say
year,
Yes.
correct?
We had enough problems with just trying to get the legislation through, and schools were another bear, because there was a recognition that really would have raised the red flag in terms of who's going to pay for it. And we anticipated that there would be amendments later that would incorporate the school element. Also want to add one other thing. Cities and counties just initially said, we're just not going to pay attention to the legislature. We just won't send plans up. And so I remember very well a conversation that I had with John Grove, who'd been the secretary of the Department of Community Affairs, which had the responsibility of receiving all these plans. And he was in my office, and I said to him, John, I've thought about it, and I think I know the way that we can do this. And he said, what? And I said, what we're going to do is if they don't submit their plans by the required time, we'll withhold their revenue sharing money, which is all of their sales tax distribution monies, and it was a
chunk of
substantial
change.
amount. And John said, you'll never get it through.
She did. There's teeth in that law.
He came back later and said,
That was a good
I really
carrot.
want to tell you that was a surprise.
So they
That's
get
a
them in on
stick.
time now.
That's a stick.
So they got them in on time.
Yeah, they got them in on
Consequently.
time.
Okay, Bob, back to you.
Well, just for everyone's idea of this county and how we're growing, for the past 200 years, this county, we're up to a little over 1 million people right now. And we're looking at the next 50 years, we're going to grow another 500,000 people. So the magnitude of growth is accelerating tremendously about the development that's going to be occurring. And another example is, think in terms of, if anyone's familiar with Plant City, that's about 25,000 people, 27,000. We're looking at one Plant City a year being built in Hillsborough County for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Didn't most of this growth also occur in the last 20 or 30 years? Or a lot of
It has been accelerating from 10 to 15,000, and more recently we've been up to around 30 to 32,000 people a year in Hillsborough County. We've dropped slightly.
Okay.
But the issues facing the county, and I do want to say, I want to step back and say, why do local governments plan besides being mandated? And I think from a planner's perspective, local governments plan to improve the quality of life based upon the development decisions made by local government. We want to make sure our quality of life gets better, those who are paying the taxes. And we also want to make sure we do it in a fiscally responsible manner so that as we continue to grow, we don't degrade our services, presently, our current taxpayers' levels of service. If we do that, I don't think we're representing the citizens very well to approve of things without making sure that their quality of life improves.
And speaking of that, the funding for all of this, Hillsborough County's decision for a long time was different than it just recently became, correct?
On funding schools,
Or on impact of growth.
well, schools
okay.
is the one that's really looked at. And schools was recently a state-mandated subject and element. In '05, Hillsborough County has to adopt a chapter by '08. And I think it's good to mandate that cities and counties look at how growth is impacting schools. It hasn't been looked at in the past. And the county commissioners recently even though phased in, school impact fees going from $195 per house, which has been that way for probably 20 years, gradually increasing it, phasing it in up to $4,000 a house for the impact that a single-family house has upon the school's capital program. The school's ability to
And
pay
that's a
for...
one-time $195, right?
It used to
was,
be,
or
yes.
at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was controversial, but I think with the school board, the Board of County Commissioners, I think, agreed that that was appropriate, and so that was adopted to be phased in over the next several years. And I think that was a good decision to assist the schools that were getting farther behind, which meant more congested schools. And I think that's the first thing we don't want as we grow, to have more congested schools. And we were growing at a tremendous rate, even though it slowed down even with schools, to have that many students in a room that Hillsborough County couldn't respond.
And that many
This
students
has
in a
helped.
building. And
Yes.
there's so many of them. We got a call. Let me just grab this one. You're on Speak Up.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I just want to make a comment. I'm a ninth-generation Floridian, and I'm very, very concerned about how all of Florida is being paved over. I mean, we're losing our rural and agricultural land, and it seems that the Hillsborough County Commissioners approve sprawling into all the rural areas all the time, and the developmental industry has its way with all the time.
Well, we're going to address that for you. Thank you for calling.
And I couldn't agree more. And talking about how many, 500,000 more people are going to be here in the next 50 years, and so we've got to make this plan to accommodate those people. That's maybe the single most devastating argument that citizens trying to protect our communities from overdevelopment here, time and time again. A bajillion people are coming, so we're all going to have to just make sacrifices and make room for them, and just live with the overcrowded roads and overcrowded schools. And I think what we ought to be doing is starting first with how many people in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years can we afford, and how many can we accommodate, like Bob was talking about, to the benefit of the residents that are here, that would help grow business that was here, you know, not talking about stopping growth, but talking about managing it for the benefit of the residents that are already here, not the people who might be here and not the people who might make a quick buck and move on, but for the people who are here. And we're not, even with the new impact fees for the schools, we're not ahead on that. We're still, that's not enough to cover the deficit we're going to be facing if we keep doing what we're doing in the next 20 years. There's a recent study that our county has just completed in January 2007 that shows we'll be $339 million behind on schools, even given this recent increase in impact fees, and 3.2 something billion behind on the rest of it, roads, because those impact fees on schools don't begin to address our unfunded needs for our roads.
So you think we're going to see billboards that say homeschool, that's the best thing to do? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ron.
I think that over these 25 years together, the development community really has been intrigued by the way that they've left the currency out of concurrency. And for 25 years, we've had a form of discipline, but the discipline was based 25 years ago on the fact that the government, in effect, entered into sort of of a deal, a compact that would involve the courage to go out and fund enough money so that the developer would be able to pay a share that would still enable him to stay in business and to build folks homes who wanted homes built for them.
Are you talking about no impact fees and those kinds of things, or
No,
other concurrency issues?
Other concurrency issues. What I'm talking about is when this parenting, this commendable parenting of development 25 years ago came into play, it involved a compact between the legislature and the people of Florida that before it would simply shut down development that didn't have the facilities available concurrent with development, that the legislature would, over time, fund the necessary facilities in concert with the developers who would pay a share that the market would bear. And it would be a parenting in which, and a compact in which developers did pay their fair share every time that they pulled a permit. And as Bob mentioned, for a while there, school impact fees were not high enough. Therefore, what has happened, and John DeGrove, who was the father of this program, sat down in the barber's chair when he got home to West Palm Beach, and the barber had been reading the local papers about what had just happened in the legislature that Pat described. And here's what the barber asked John DeGrove. John, tell me something. Is it true that when you've parented growth to all be close into town here, like close to this barbershop, that you also passed a law that said you can only build where there's adequate capacity, which is 10 or 15 miles out toward the Everglades, end of question. To which John had to admit to the barber, you know, you're right. When we said we want to compact growth closer to town where the capacity's not good, it's kind of congested down around this barbershop, 10, 15 miles out of here toward the Everglades is where the capacity is, and so this concurrency system is in effect scaring growth away from this West Palm Beach area where we should be putting it. So now this county, the last couple of days, in some very acrimonious discussions of compact urban growth, preventing urban sprawl, has to deal with the fact that the legislature and the developers have to get together on the subject of what we do to encourage growth where, and if we're going to compact growth, then we have to create the right kind of economic incentives in order to compact growth and not have simultaneous provisions that say you can only build where the capacity is available, and that chases people out to where
I get this impression that Pat's got some comments about this, but we have a caller. You're on Speak Up.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. I just want to make a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I wanted to make a comment regarding the growth management.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that I believe that the accommodating for the 500,000 people coming in the next 50 years, the people who appreciate the rural side of Florida should be appreciated, and that we shouldn't just have to accommodate all those people.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to respond to that because I think that it's important to point out that Hillsborough is an agricultural county. We're actually the third largest county in terms of production of agricultural products in the state. And I have my figures right here, in the top 2% of agricultural counties in the country. And there is a big economic benefit to agriculture being in the community. I also take another tact, and that is I think it's a matter of national security. I think that we should never get to the point where we don't have agricultural products to furnish our people. Because if we have to depend upon other countries, as we can tell now, the tension is so high in so many places, for our food, that is a security issue. So I think there is a reason to protect those agricultural lands. And of course, Ron, you're talking about, the fact that government should provide the infrastructure if they want to encourage development to occur. I can't really buy that totally. I understand that there are situations where government has to step in, but you can't always do things on the cheap. If it costs so much to build something and a development is coming in and that you need the roads to accommodate that development, I'm not saying development everywhere, I'm saying that development, I think it should be paid for by the development. Now, if on the other hand that drives the cost of the product so high up that people can't afford housing, then that's where the government has to step in and assist in providing affordable housing for people. There has to be something that balances that opportunity for everybody to have homes. But we've lived in a community where we're used to things not costing as much, frankly.
But should everybody, does affordable housing mean that new housing has to be built that's affordable for everybody? Because I know my husband and I lived in a very old townhouse for 12 years before we bought a 20-year-old house. I mean, we have yet to afford a brand spanking new house, and so the argument that developers need to be able to build new housing, turn our farmland into subdivisions full of cookie cutter housing without paying impact fees to pay for the growth, in order that those houses can be affordable. It sort of escapes me, because I've found my affordable housing elsewhere.
But we're not always talking about housing when we talk about development, because we need developers are the ones that build schools too. Is that correct? Yes,
School boards.
Especially now.
But who builds them?
School boards.
And yes, and who do they hire?
They hire contractors,
Who are?
Developers.
builders,
And developers.
as opposed to okay.
Well, you know what I
Okay.
mean. But Bob, this question, and I didn't mean to be too short about
That's
it,
all right.
but this question, we've got two of them. One, 9th generation Floridian, very concerned about paved over roads. Where can we save some things? And also mention rural. And the second caller what are we doing in your planning, or in the plans that have been made for Hillsborough County over the next 20 years to protect the agriculture and the rural? Pat Frank just said you've got to protect.
And I agree. I agree with what she said 100%, and I appreciate your comment and the caller's question. If we can look at that first upper map, if they can go to it, because
They're on it.
all right, that map reflects all of Hillsborough County, everything in color, and essentially going from South County, that's far down south. They'll see a black line that sort of goes up to central Hillsborough County and then wraps around and goes up into northwestern Hillsborough County. And in 1990, I believe it was 3 or 4, the Board of County Commissioners, and we're talking here about the county's growth compared to the cities, Temple Terraces or Plant Cities. Mm-hmm. But the Board of County Commissioners adopted that as what we call an urban service area. And that's where the county would encourage growth to occur inside over the next 20 to 30 years, only because that's where the county was anticipating to provide not only sewer and water, but police and fire. That's what we call the urban service area, within it, meaning within it going toward the city of Tampa.
Right.
And it's worked. It's worked very well. And there's still enough vacant developable land, some would say, but it's not at what someone can afford to purchase to go develop.
You're saying from to the right side of the black line.
On the right-hand side is the rural area, but on the inside is the urban service area, and there is sufficient vacant developable land there for the next 20 years. Some would argue 5, some would argue 10. We think it's adequate. But let me carry it a step further. If they look at the green, that's rural area.
Okay.
And so when the state law was adopted, that didn't necessarily push growth out there because the levels of service, the roads were out there. If they had adopted levels of service, then someone really couldn't grow out there because of zoning and the comprehensive plan took over. So it wasn't an encouragement of sprawl. I want to clarify that. A couple of other points in that the dark greens is environmentally sensitive lands. And then Pat mentioned about agriculture. What we have yet to address, looking at that upper map, is how much growth do we want to recognize and plan for on an annual basis? Is agriculture important to this county? Or do we want to use it as a holding pattern for growth? Are environmental sensitive lands important to this county? Or do we want to allow them to be transferred, moved physically? We need public discussion, yes or no answers to that, to really start planning for the magnitude of growth that we're anticipating. And let me go down to that bottom map, and then I'll get off the maps if that's okay. That bottom map is really, you'll see in the orange and burnt ochre and yellow, what we call tiers, levels of growth inside the urban service area. And one of the things we're talking about right now is in that dark orange, We're talking about that's where we want to offer incentives to the development community where there is a transit line within a quarter of a mile, which is an incentive for growth. And in that orange, which is most of that urban service area, that's within 3/4 of a mile walking distance to a transit line. And then the yellow...
You mean a bus stop?
Yes,
Okay.
bus lines. And the yellow is essentially, that's much farther than the current transit lines. But what we're saying is within that urban service area, we want to encourage growth to occur closer in on vacant, undeveloped parcels, and I'll get at this, to offer everyone lifestyle choices, quality of life choices, transportation choices, and the development community choices of taking advantage of the decisions about the tiers on where they want to invest, knowing where the market will occur. So I'm trying to answer all those questions, but you know, we realize that the
It's hard to tell on this map, and it may be for viewers, but let's say is in that burnt orange area, is that some of Brandon, or is that east
Yeah.
of, that's Brandon?
There's some areas in Brandon,
And then as you go out into the orange area beyond the reddish or
Mm-hmm.
darker orange, well, as you go down, that's Apollo Beach, and is this not right?
down I-75, yes. I don't think we've gotten to Apollo Beach yet, but yes, that's
But
a
over
SWAT.
now over to the right more where it bulks out. What is that area into?
That's Brandon area, and just east of Brandon, and you'll see that tiny orange sliver going out Highway 60.
Okay.
That does not include, I don't believe, Fishhawk.
No.
But that's where the current routes are. We're trying
And
to...
it seems like there has been. That's where a lot of the growth has been, right in Brandon. We've got we have 2 callers now. You're on Speak Up.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Marilyn Smith here.
I didn't recognize your voice at all.
Right. I am so pleased to see you got the big brains there. And Bob, you just came up with what I wanted to talk about, the environment, the farming. And of course, Pat knows about food because she eats, right, Ben? She said that many years ago.
That's
when
right.
asked.
I'm an agricultural expert. I eat.
That's right. But the point is, Florida wouldn't be Florida without the environment that we have, and we can only trade off so many places and move them a certain distance. Here's the problem. How do you move the green swamp? You don't. That's our environment. You cannot continue to deep six, or people try to deep six the fact that this is an agricultural community, and Mrs. Frank knows that as well as I do, and I feel just as she does about the security of our food. I want to know about it. I want to know we have it instead of someone else. Bad enough, we already got our fuel in that situation. Water and food are the sustenance of life.
And water's the next oil, isn't it?
I don't know, water and food, air, air quality, all of that is wound up together in our environment, and we are an agricultural environment. Well, there's something else to Louise, but we're not going there. But
Okay.
I think Robert hit on it, and Mrs. Frank hit on it, and of course, Ron is trying to be the balancer in there, but that's okay. But Robert, if you would talk a little bit more about that, because when I had the show with you and Sarah Fadopoulos, we talked about the reasons why the EPC is so important. And our poor EPC, they're trying to take more money away from that because they're being told, the commissioners are being told, oh, it's not important. They only have 2 of those in Pinellas County. Well, they don't have anything to guard anymore. They gave it all away. We still have a great deal of environment here that needs to be protected. Our wetlands are constantly in danger. I've been on enough committees to tell you that for sure, and I can see you waving your heads up and down. Yeah.
All right, we're going to let them talk about that EPC then.
And let's talk about the environment and agriculture and how they should work together. I would love to hear about that.
All right, thank you, Marilyn.
May I speak to that?
You go ahead, please.
Marilyn, you make a great point, and Pat's right about the combination of necessities for agriculture to be protected in this community forever and the environmental to be protected in this community forever. But that balance, you're right, Marilyn, there's some balance needed here. And one of the balances about agriculture first before we talk about environmental is this. Those crops do not pick themselves. Despite some technology which has to be run by people who need affordable housing, we have to focus on the fact that if we protect the agriculture and the environmental without practical ability for someone to still afford a home, those 32,000 new people a year, Bob, are going to need to find some way that the impact fees don't go up so high so quick that they do not come here to provide our job force and to provide folks to pick those crops. So what we need to do is take this combination of funding mechanisms that we talked about together, and I commend what you said, Pat, because I agree with you. There's a balance here, and developers are willing to pay their fair share, but neither the law nor their market will let them pay 2 or 3 times their fair share, and that's why we have to find some way to keep the price of land and the facilities all within reason. And if we run them folks away because of the combinations of too much by way of exactions too soon, or if we do not have practical protections, then we're going to chase off those job opportunities and folks to pick those crops.
But there are exceptions to impact fees for low-income construction. For people who are of low income and live in an area, then the fee is waived.
In some
so
cases,
it doesn't
in the
apply
discretion
to
of the
that.
county commission, though.
Yeah, but
sometimes.
And
I
the
think
county
that-
commission has done that.
Sometimes.
And if our growth doesn't pay for itself, then the taxpayers are going to be on the hook. We are going deeper and deeper in debt. So we're going to have to find some way, whether that means deciding how much growth we can afford and we're willing to pay for as taxpayers in conjunction with developers, or having developers come to the table and say, all right, we'll pick up the tab. But we cannot simply say, well, we can't let the developers pay too much because then they can't afford that. We have to look at the fact that we're going deep in debt on this.
And
Bob, I know that Marilyn wants you to talk about the Everglades. I mean, environment.
I want to talk about water, too. So
She
you
wants
go
to talk
ahead.
about water.
She's
because
gonna, that relates.
water.
Good point.
She could put you to sleep on water.
That's good.
She knows more about water
That's an
than
imperative.
you can dream about. Hold on 1 second, though. Let me see what this. You're on Speak Up.
Actually, that was my question. My question was about the water restrictions. We're already on water restrictions much of the year. How can we accommodate the water needs of the additional growth you're projecting?
Right. Okay. Well, Pat's the water lady.
Well,
so
and
we'll
this
have
is
her
what
talk.
bothers me.
Thank you.
When the county joined other counties and created Tampa Bay Water, and they signed the agreement said that each of the counties will receive all the water that they need. There'll be no limit on it, that they're obligated to provide water to them. So theoretically, we don't have a water shortage because all we have is this endless supply from Tampa Bay Water. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're going to pay, and we're going to pay very generously to get that water. And it's going to destroy our environment at the same time. Because I recall when the desalinization plant was discussed back
And
in
boy, were you
1998.
right or were you right?
I was right.
Still is.
I hate to say it,
I was
but
wondering
I
if
was
you
right.
Still is.
Why would you hate that? I love that you were right. Okay.
Well, and you know, some of us said it's in the wrong location, it's not going to work, and we were the naysayers. And so, nonetheless, we were overvoted and outvoted, and they went ahead and located it where they shouldn't have. And it hasn't been working. And it's now, what, 98 to now, we're almost 10 years down the road. The cost that was estimated of 1,000 gallons of water at the beginning was $2. Now it's $3. And we haven't even received the $85 million that Southwest Florida Management had pledged to give to Tampa Bay Water when the desal plant was completed, because the plant is not working. So we don't even know if that's going to be a pass-on to the property owners, because
Do you think they threw the monkey wrench in there so they didn't have to cough up that money?
I don't.
No, but I think we've got a major problem here.
Yeah.
Now, so what's happening? The desal plant is not operating. Now Tampa Bay Water says they need water, and they need groundwater because it's cheaper. They recognize that the desal water and the reservoir water is too expensive, so they're going to take more groundwater, which was exactly the reason that the initial agreement was signed in terms of Hillsborough County. We didn't want the wells to be pumped by Pinellas County. We wanted to have the wars stop, and we wanted to have some mutual agreement where everyone would share and share amicably. Now they're going to try to reduce the minimum flow over the Hillsborough River. and take the water out of the Hillsborough River. Now that means that where you have the Hillsborough River and it meets the bay, you've got a little estuary set there, and that's a breeding ground for fish because there's a blend of salt and fresh water. You draw back the water from the fresh end of it, and you don't have that balance that allows the breeding of the fish. So we're now affecting the environment by what we're doing. So this is an endless problem, and you know, I just feel very badly that there wasn't more foresight in all of the parts in this whole thing, because I think it's been a total disaster.
But don't we have a solution in the next 10 years, Pat, that everything you've said is correct to a point, but Florida gets twice the national average of rainfall, 53 inches a year. Our problem is that we don't store it. So we have the first reservoir, which is working like a charm. We are planning a second one. We need to speed up the opening of the second reservoir because we get twice the national average in rainfall. It's just that we let it flow into the Atlantic and into the Gulf. We have to create a second and a third reservoir so that when we need the water, it is accumulated from when we get that overflow of it. You were right about some of the early missteps. And they're not missteps if in 6 months they finally get to function and they function near budget, but you're right about the escalating cost, and we just have to focus on the second and the third reservoir.
Well, I don't disagree with you about reservoirs being a good source, as long as you don't draw down from the rivers too much. But the problem with the reservoir that we've constructed is that it's above ground. And we have not yet seen a bad hurricane and the reservoir full of 15 billion gallons of water. If that happens, and there's no way to drain that reservoir, there will be a flood down in that area that will be of major magnitude. And it will wash out the roads, and there's only one bridge that goes up into the city area from there, as I recall. It's going to be a problem. And a lot of the development that was permitted down there, and I kept saying, I don't think this is a good idea.
It could be faulted that the development down there could be more faulted then. Bob, what about this? What are these ideas?
I think
is
Ron
that part of...
and Pat have raised some good points. And the first caller, in that people have moved to Florida, and they live in Hillsborough County and Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City, because they enjoy our way of life. They enjoy the weather. They enjoy, I'm sorry to say, but their yards and growing shrubs, etc. And now they're being told, you have to stop once a week during the summer. And they've been told, well, no, this is just during the summer. Then it's a 7-year drought period. And so I understand the frustration. And Tampa Bay Water have said they can supply the water long-term wise within the demand. That doesn't deal with the short-term concerns of our local citizens. And let me give you another example. TECO is facing the same situation, and in that wherever growth occurs, they've got to supply power. Believe me, that is difficult because as it occurs further out, we've got to look at substations and where it's going to be located, and is it going to impact local residents if it's above ground, etc. That becomes a major planning issue for them trying to plan just like the location of the reservoirs and the desal plant. And those are two silent issues that we don't get into a lot of discussion. They respond without a lot of discussion. And that's a major planning problem as we continue to, and we need to, approve of growth. Our concern, and one of my concerns, is how do we pay for it? And I'll go back to one example of favorite of mine is paying for growth as it deals with transportation. We talked about impact fees, and we need to look at the impact of a single-family detached house. Right now, on the average, it's paying, developers paying roughly $1,400 a house. And its impact upon a transportation system is about $6,000 to $8,000 a house. Now,
over what period? How do they...
It's calculated over a 20-year period, its impacts.
Okay.
And so as we continue to prove of growth, and we should, if we don't get that difference, that means our roads get more congested because we're not expanding it based upon those impacts. And so our roads are going to continue to get more congested. I think some of the things we need to think about as we try and plan in the future is ensuring that we have an adequate funding supply not to solve our transportation problem. We won't. We will never build enough roads, period. We're going to have more congestion, period. We've got to find a way to improve our bus system, have bus rapid transit. We to tell you the truth, need to design and make decisions on a commuter rail system. Not necessarily fund it now, but we need to start deciding location of the system and the stations. So people and developers can start making investments in those stations, knowing the government's committed to that, so people can say, you know, I don't want to live 45 minutes from where I work. I want to live next to a station, and I don't need a car. And I can walk, and I can enjoy the congestion. I don't like living in isolation. Right now, that's really not offered as a choice. But those are some of the things on the plate, not just of the county commissioners, but Tampa City Council, Temple Terrace, and Plant City in the future, as we try and make decisions right now on growth.
What alternatives are there if, for example, what you just said, $1,400 of a $6,000 tab for transportation alone is not being, it's just right there, and then we've got the freight on a school and all the other water at $3 for however many gallons. What other ways are there? Isn't there any money left from sales taxes or from gasoline taxes or
all of those
property taxes or?
It's presently being consumed just to widen intersections to maintain our system.
There's just not enough money in there?
No, even with the community investment tax, we can't keep up with growth. And I'm not so sure that we should attempt to solve our congestion problems. I don't think we should. But I want to get at this issue of affordable housing, because I think we need to be real careful not to mislead people that those out in agriculture that are helping us are those that are buying brand new homes and 99% of the new homes that are being built. I don't want to create a class system here, but they're not buying $250,000 homes.
Not a migrant worker.
Well, that's what was
Is that what you
implied,
mean?
and I think
Yeah.
we need to be careful. I think the issue here is to try and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to buy a house. I didn't say new house. I said buy a house,
Right.
somewhere available. I think you'll find houses of all prices available in different areas. And I think we need to be careful that we don't mislead people, that we're pricing people out. Because if we aren't careful, we're going to price ourselves out of our quality of life that we moved here for.
That's for sure. You're on Speak Up,
Oh, yeah, hold on, let me
Turn-
turn down my TV.
please.
I'm not sure, I might have missed it before, but because it is a big concern of mine, I was wondering what are our options now as far as water is concerned? What are we looking to, and what do you think, Mrs. Frank, would be a good option? What is it that you think would be the answer to help solve our water problems? Because that's like a big concern of mine, and I was just hoping you could shed some light on it so I could have a little bit more understanding.
like reclaim.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Well, I wish I had a simple answer to that, because we're so far along in this agreement with Tampa Bay Water and the other counties that there's no way to really back away from it. We're tied at the waist with each other, and unfortunately, Hillsborough County is bearing the brunt of the burden in supplying the water for the other counties. Most of the major projects are located in Hillsborough County. I'm offended by that, because I think that the other counties have an obligation to also find alternative sources in their counties.
How many counties in Tampa Bay water?
It's
involved? Is it
Three.
four or
Pasco,
three?
Pinellas, and Hillsborough, and
Right.
then the city of Newport Richey and the city of Tampa. Why Newport Richey has a vote the same as the city of Tampa, I don't understand, but
And
it
it's
must
here to
have,
make the deal in '98.
it was to try to get the votes together for it. But it really is out of.
But, well, beyond the agreement and the problem we're in right now was Ron's idea, the reservoir, you mentioned that too. Is that another thing we should be, is that
I
part
think
of
a reservoir is a good idea.
just not above ground?
I don't think that we should be pumping water to put in a reservoir. You know, I think that if there's overflow from the rivers, and if you can prevent the water from going out to the bay, yes, that's a good idea. But I do definitely think it ought to be below ground. And I had an arrangement with IMC Phosphate Company where they were going to donate one of their old phosphate mines to Tampa Bay Water and pay Tampa Bay Water $3 million if they'd use that site below ground in a safe area where there are no homes around it. And Tampa Bay Water said it would be too expensive. That's what the staff said to me.
Pat's right. We need to reopen that whole subject of where we can use existing accumulated resources for the second and third reservoir. And another fourth of the solution is reclaimed water. We do have to find ways to recycle our water and to use reclaimed water more aggressively. Thirdly, I think we need to continue the conservation. And I think we need to learn a culture of conservation, because even with these solutions, some of these solutions are not affordable to our elderly and to those on fixed income, and therefore we need to keep the price of water down by working hard on conservation as a permanent culture, not as a temporary culture. Secondly, we need to work hard on reclaimed, and thirdly, we need to be smart about our reservoirs. Then that fourth solution is only hopefully an interim solution vis-a-vis additional pumping from the groundwater, which is, as you said in '98, that's why we stopped and started a thoughtful regime, is so that we not pump our wetlands dry. I think you're absolutely right, Pat, on that.
But we're already doing quite a good job in conservation in this area. We're leading the charts in conservation year-round, and not that there's not room for improvement. There is, but we've pushed that pretty hard already. Another water issue is stormwater management, and the way that overdevelopment has been allowed to pave over too much of our watersheds in places, and the engineers tell us that they've done studies to say that this development and this development and this Publix is going to fit in just fine without flooding. The people who are there complaining and saying that it probably will flood out their neighborhoods, and sometimes those people are right, and that is a problem, and we need to look at better wetland buffers and better setbacks in order to stop some of that problem, which is also impacting our homeowners' insurances for flooding, when you start talking about flooding.
Bob talked before about how these plans are done, but how much input does the public have in this process? Or I mean, even if meetings are open, are they coming? Are they being alerted? Are they aware? How do we get people's...
Thanks for asking. The state law very well required local governments, as they do plan amendments and rezonings, but to have public hearings. But in Hillsborough County, with all four governments, they've taken it a step further, and that they require the Planning Commission to have workshops. We're required by state law to have public hearings on plan amendments. Then we have public workshops with the Board of County Commissioners and public hearings. But prior to all that, we take it out to the general public. And we started on this evaluation process about 3 years ago. We had probably 15 to 20 meetings all over Hillsborough County to say, how do you want this county to grow? And we had a lot of good input, and a lot of the maps you're seeing are a resultant of that. They wanted a stage growth, they wanted a phase growth, and so we did it, and it's being recommended right now. And so the public's input means a lot to us. I wish we could find a way to stir it up more, to get people, because they won't come out unless it's a rezoning that impacts them. And it's hard to talk about growth 20 or 30 years from now, and you want to see growth down in the eastern part of Hillsborough. Somebody living in Tampa won't. So we try and provide, just like the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Arm that's currently doing a rail study. We're having public meetings, we have websites. To tell you the truth, I don't know how we could get more public input, at least offer it. We can't get the issues stirred up enough to get people to really comment on how do you really feel as a group. We're getting 4,000 or 5,000 people commenting on an annual basis. That's not a lot with 1 million people. But you also have to look as an example, how many people voted in the City of Tampa election? Mm-hmm. You know, percentage-wise, maybe that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. One way to get the public to participate is going to be to translate from all of this jargon to down-to-earth, understandable language what these proposed plans are, instead of engaging in all these acronyms and all of these words that don't mean anything except to those who practice law in it for a living. It is very, very hard for an everyday person to understand, what are you trying to tell me? What do you mean level of service? What do you mean concurrency? What do you mean urban service area? I mean, those are fancy words, all three of them, but what does it mean? Can build here, can't build out here, kind of things like the barber of John DeGrove again. I think we need to translate them, then the public can come out and talk about them.
I know in our channels we ran a few of the workshops when you did them before to try to keep people, get people aware, but I think that's a really good point, Ron. I mean, the problem is who understands it. And then your point, which is this is not urgent. It's not happening to me. It doesn't affect me until there's a development going on down the street. And so how do you get, when we, people are just so jammed as to think of this.
I was reading about Orlando and how they went about trying to get a consensus in their community, and they had government and business working together, and they had all the major players that you could think of, but they found that they did have problems getting the public to come out. They found more success in using the internet.
MyRegion.org.
Yeah.
MyRegion.org. You can go online tonight on MyRegion.org and actually watch the way the citizens of those 6 or 7 counties around Orlando told the folks in understandable ease, seeing it understandable ease.
And that's just for that area, MyRegion.org?
Correct. MyRegion.org is for the Central Florida area.
So that
counties.
couldn't be started in Hillsborough County?
We're working
maybe
on it
spread?
for the reality check.
We
Urban
have
Land Institute has
You
one
do?
working for May 18. 300 business leaders are going to be getting together and taking the values of this community, which have been gathered already, and putting together on May 18th, 300 business leaders a reality check, which is to try to start something from the same team that did MyRegion.org in Central Florida to come over here and do it with us on May 18th. Urban Land Institute in a joint venture with the Tampa Bay Partnership.
Is that going to be open?
RealityCheck.org.
Is that going to be
May
open
18th.
to the public?
Yes, absolutely.
Are we going to
Reality
run that
check.
on our channels, on our
Please
overnight?
do.
You're going to give us some information on that?
That's 7
Go to our
counties.
website
7 counties.
and
No,
give us
that's 7 counties.
Oh, that's just not just us. You're on
it's
Speak
not
Up.
us.
Hi, yes, I do have one comment, please,
Always.
I'd like to make. I'm a concerned citizen, and I have attended lots of those meetings, the ones that were held after my working hours and not the ones that are held during the day. And I have been beaten down by lots of the developers who attend those meetings, and their vote counts more than mine. And, of course, I understand why their votes are weighed more so than mine would be. And I know that they will build these buildings and then go to another community and to another state for all that matters. And it is very frustrating for the community. And we do this repeatedly, and we try, and we're beaten down repeatedly. And I was just curious if there was any plans with you saying that concerned citizens don't show up. We do. We try. We are beaten down repeatedly, and we try again. And that's it. I would like to hear a comment from some of those people on the panel. Just explain to me why it would be worth my trouble to try again.
Thank you very much.
I hear that a lot.
Yep. Thank you.
I hear that a lot.
Well, we've got a member of one of
I
those
think
commissions.
it's always good to try again. And I would say go one step further. Run for public office and replace some of the people that you don't agree with their philosophy of. This is something that is the next step for people to take. That's where I started out. I was going down to school board meetings, and I didn't like the answers I was getting. And they weren't listening to me, so I ran for the school board.
There's a huge disconnect right now between what people say they want and who we are electing. And part of the problem is that our current county commissioners their campaigns are largely funded by development interests, and so in their minds their job is secure if they please the developers, and they don't worry about the voters so much, especially with 15% voter turnout showing up in the city of Tampa. But our commissioners are feeling like their job is to please the developers in order to keep their job. And our citizens are expressing this kind of frustration, saying that when they've shown up, whether it's a land use hearing or a comp plan amendment, in many cases, the developer carries the day, even when staff has recommended against it sometimes. And it becomes very frustrating, and they feel like they can't make a difference.
There are
Can I
some
that?
advantages to developers that I think Ron would probably like to, just for a little balance here. And you might want to bring it up, but it may not be a politician or an elected official who's really against the people, but someone who's for the growth that'll bring people better jobs and increase the economy, because they're sold it a different way. And why don't you address that, Ron? Because I really hate to leave it out there where they're all evil, having represented several of them in my PR firm.
Half of what Mariella said.
Nice people, too, I might add.
Some of my best friends are developers.
Thank you.
Okay, that's what I meant. Let's let him have it.
Half of what Mariella said is correct, which is that the only way that either the development community or other civic leaders, because sometimes the developers are civic leaders, the only way that they can achieve a balance with respect to influence over county commissioners and city council people is they have to bring a better practical application of whatever it is that is before them. And if by chance, some years, it looks like the developers seem to have an edge for a couple of months,
They
and
brought a better
sometimes they do, they brought a better
Better
argument,
argument?
and or when they brought the better argument, they brought it with translation, the kinds we're now talking about, where they were able to take some of this mountain of paper and they were able to cut through the mountain of paper and say, look, here's what this really means, like that John DeGrove barber again. And the folks go, you're kidding me. I don't believe it. They call the staff. Yeah, that's exactly what all those 88 pages really mean. Well, then suddenly they're a changed person because, first of all, they can't believe that would actually be happening. And these are untoward effects, unexpected effects, inadvertent consequences, maybe occasionally misunderstood consequences, but usually it's just a matter of getting your story, A, translated to the basics, which we just talked about, and B, getting before the commissioners who are really anxious to hear the true story. They really are.
Yeah, generally.
We
have I think he just,
She was a great
1
commissioner.
minute?
She listened to all of it.
Darn, 1 minute. You got 15 seconds apiece. Let's go. Pat, what you got? Anything else you want to make sure the viewer knows that we missed?
Well, I think there's one thing that we could do, and I've been reading some material about it, and that is to look at some of the congestion pricing theory, systems that work on roads. And, this requires that you pay a fee to ride on a road, but it directs you toward the way so that you're going in the fast lane if you have a lot of people in the car.
Like in London.
And
I think we're going to keep talking about this and end up being off the air.
sorry.
London does that.
No, we could go ahead and keep right on talking about it, but I think they're going to say
Okay.
goodbye. Thanks for tuning in, and I wish you were all here to hear the rest of this. You may miss that, and I hope that you'll tune in again. We may have to do another show on this, obviously, to get all these points across. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Good night. Yeah, thanks.